So as a concluding question of today, I would ask to you all, so whether you agree with limits and opportunities highlighted during the day today and the ones added up by the working groups. So if you agree on that, if you see the same in your own experience, and what policy measure according to you should be taken and move forward. So I would give before the floor to Stefano and then to Tommaso for these two questions.
Thank you, Carla, and thanks to the team that organized this interesting webinar. So I think that today we discussed a lot of really strategic points that need to be assessed for the future of mountain areas in terms of biodiversity conservation as well as livelihood of these areas, because I heard a lot topic that stakeholders need to be involved in this, especially in the establishment of protected areas. This has been a topic in the research world for many years, and I think only now we're catching up with the practices of co-development and stakeholder engagement in the overall management plan. So I heard a lot, also the new implementer governance system and capacity building for local communities. And I think this is a really crucial aspect in trying to all have the local stakeholders understand the nature of the value of nature and biodiversity, also not only in economical terms, but also other type of topics. And I also think that, well, as you said, we are leading an Horizon project focusing on climate change adaptation. And I think this will be a huge topic for mountain communities in the upcoming years, because of course there will be new opportunities, but on the other side, there will be a lot of challenges. And I think topics that was discussed today, which is land use and land use conflicts, is going to increase in a lot of mountain areas, especially on key sectors such as tourism, which was mentioned also in our group. Tourism has a lot of opportunities, but also a lot of challenges related to these, especially related to nature conservation. So I think this webinar today was really interesting, and I think that the discussion should focus at the policy level on how to involve local stakeholders in all of these development plans of protected areas, how to engage with them and have them understand the value of protecting nature resources, as well as how to manage them, especially in terms also of carnivores that are coming back. Especially I live in the Alps, so here in Italy we have a lot of discussion in the Alps related to carnivore and this type of conflicts that they generate. And I think it was interesting that in our working session, we also mentioned that actually the perception also changed through the time, because we used to have the carnivores in the Alps. Now they're back, but we do not perceive them as local species anymore. So we perceive them as external, and agriculture sector especially perceives them as a threat. But is this perception correct or not? And I think the discussion should be brought forward with the policymakers, because the policymakers sometimes are not involved in this type of discussion, and they're not aware of all the scientific, especially the scientific research that's behind this type of projects and conservation practices.
Thanks a lot, Stefano. And then I give the floor also to Tommaso. So what is your view on the discussion we had today, and what would you suggest by policy point of view?
First of all, good morning, everyone, and thanks to this webinar. And the question that leads this discussion is very important. And what has been said on the natural restoration law, I think is paradigmatic. And I report some thoughts about from my practical and experience. And from a general point of view, I think that yes, in my opinion, protected areas can be a very important opportunity to increase the value of economic activities, particularly in mountain areas. But for this situation to happen, I think it's necessary that the right condition exist, and from the point of view of my experience, these are in large part depend on, related on three factors, two of which are closely linked to the territorial context in which we operate. In Europe, most of the habitats, particularly among those of greater naturalistic value or with bad conservation status, so those that protected areas should preserve, have anthropic origin, which means that their conservation is strictly linked to man activities, which then becomes a very important tool for conservation, biodiversity conservation and nature preservation. In most cases, these are traditional activities, as we have seen from the previous presentation, that with a properly training, today could be carried out in a more convenient, efficient, and sustainable way, and that count on an high-added value. Think, for example, to the question related with the recognition of ecosystem services. And if well managed, can lead to a significant increase in the economic value of this chain and products. Anyway, these activities need to develop of some kind of infrastructures, for example, and this pose a first element, a potential element of contrast with the protected areas. The statement is itself that human activities are necessary for biodiversity conservation, for example, contrast with the version, in my opinion, distorted of the rewilding philosophy, for example, that today has a high following, especially among the general public, and that see the man always or in the most time as a negative factor for the conservation of biodiversity. The second important aspect concern, for example, to what relate to my experience, the type of protected areas. There is in fact a significant difference between what we can name traditional protected areas, for example, national parks, and the Nature 2000 sites, for example. Although many things are changing, traditional protected areas maintain a general management approach much more linked to the limitation of human activities, or at least of some of them, for example, not always open for tourism. This approach, that in some cases is also appropriate, is or should be different from the one promoted to the Habitat Directive, for example, that with the Birds Directive is the one of the pillars of the Natura 2000 network, in which the protection of habitats and species should also take into account of economic, social, and cultural aspect, also with the regional and local specificity. And then the third aspect, I think it's very important, is the link to the preparation and the awareness level, but above all to the political will of the administration that manage protected areas. And I think this last aspect is probably one of those on which we have to work a lot. For instance, improving and expanding training activities for protected area managers, because the situation is greatly complicated because it's closely linked with to what will be the public perception and judgment. For example, when I go to a public administration, for example, over a protected area administration, and I propose interventions to recover pastures, for example, or open areas, maybe for the improvement of an extensive livestock activity. I never find anyone to tell me that the intervention is not necessary or that it will not have a positive impact. But everyone is afraid of the reaction of tourist trekkers, for example, who see the brush cutters at work. And this has a practical impact because this involves a series of restriction and prescription, for example, that then go to negatively impact the outcome of the intervention itself, limiting the development, in this case, for example, of the livestock activity. Trying to summarize what are my idea, I think there are three main topics we need to work on, and all of them has been discussed also in the previous intervention, and that is improve the communication on these topics, particularly to the general public, improve training activities for protected areas manager, but also for stakeholders, farmers, shepherds, and so on, depend on the activity and the production we are working on, and then improve the involvement level of local communities. That is another very important aspect.
Thanks a lot, Tommaso, also, and Stefano for these for your words and for also your recommendation based on your experience.